Okay, people, there's two big chapters left. Well, and some little ones after, but this Battleground one is huge. We don't have class on Friday, and this would be Thursday's one. So I'm going to give you just a little taste of the Battleground on Thursday, and I'll save the rest for, well, Monday, Tuesday, I guess. So I present to you on this Thursday, Battleground. Sounds intense. This is like that big scene in a book, right, where you've built all the way up to this, right? Yeah, it's a climax, big problem, and here we go. Alex remained steady despite the gasps around him, gathered his wits, and spoke in a smooth voice. If you live through the day, General, he said, perhaps you'll ask the High Priest Justine why she's too afraid to come here and deliver that message herself. Get back, Simber barked as the far flank of the Quilitary marchers raised long, rusty metal weapons to their shoulders. Simber's wings burst open as a shield, forcing Alex behind them as loud blasts erupted from the Quilitary, followed by the raining thuds of pellets against the stone statue. Fire! Commanded the stone beast. Alex regained his footing as the others in his squad sent a round of artistic fire at the Quilitary. Those soldiers who hadn't been hit rushed into Arteme and began firing on the unwanteds within, and the vehicles roared and coughed in preparation to enter through the gateway. Alex sent off a round of blinding highlights from his fluorescent yellow pen, hitting the drivers of the first two vehicles squarely in the eyes, as well as General Blair himself. The first vehicle lurched wildly and crashed into the wall, sending the general and two others catapulting towards Samid and Lanny. The second vehicle smashed into it, causing both jalopies to hiss and shoot boiling spurts of water back at their occupants. That means the two cars were spitting out water on the people in them. Samid, still in shock at seeing his former friend lying dead and witnessing Will's own father show absolutely no signs of emotion or remorse, realized with full certainty that the Quilitary was no longer anything he wanted to be a part of. How foolish he had been, and seeing the heartlessness all around him, it was so much worse than he remembered. He felt the old familiar rage boiling up tenfold. With a wild yell, Samid pulled a spiked metal star from his vest and flung it with all of his might at the groaning general. It struck the man in the throat and embedded deep within. General Blair's blinded eyes widened and then closed. But there was no time for anyone to reflect, as Artemians all around Samid fell to the ground. Another round of pellets from the enemy blasted and chinked off Simber, leaving him no worse for wear. Megan dropped the first two officers in the far flank with sleep spells, and Peter laid down the next dozen with words of destruction. They writhed on the ground and were succinctly trampled by the Quilitary that pressed forward, trying to get into Arteme. From the squads inside Arteme came another round of spells, causing tremendous chaos for the unsuspecting enemy. Scatterclips flew through the air, some of them dragging the enemy with them until they reached something solid enough in which to stick. Still, it was all the Artemaeans could do to protect themselves as the lines of vehicles and the near flank poured into the magical world. "Rufus, I need numbers," Simber roared. Immediately the squirrelicorn flew up, hovering just below the barbed wire ceiling, counted out a quick estimate, and dropped to the cheetah's back. 1,000 at least. They're backed up all the way to the nursery," Rufus reported. "More than I expected." How many of how many of ours down?" Rufus flew up again to look around, and then darted into Arteme and returned. 12 down out here, at least 2 dozen down inside." Simber roared his displeasure, "Meh," which caused several nearby members of the Quilitary to hit the dirt. "Double your attacks, make them permanent," he roared. "They are recovering from your spells. Your comrades are falling." Alex and Megan pulled out their permanent power weapons. Within 30 minutes, the two of them, working in a beautiful tandem, rendered 44 Quilitary members permanently frozen in odd poses using Alex's splatter paint combined with Megan's Nutcracker ice dance. As the squads behind the fantastic Simber shield met their marks, a few of them falling back with stray pallet wounds, the squads inside nailed the enemy with fireball dragons, stinging soliloquies, splatter paint, fire steps, itch glue, slam poetry, scatter clips, slash singing, blinding highlights, and the dreaded Shakespearean theater curse from those who had no qualms about inflicting mortal fencing wounds on their enemies. Lanny and Samid weren't quite as fortunate. Samid, though he thought he had prepared himself for this, soon found himself face to face with his father. And unlike with General Blair, Samid hesitated a split second too long in this matchup. And Mr. Burkesh took advantage by slamming his son in the head and chest with a shield. Samid groaned and fell. Immediately, Lanny reacted with a paralyzing taunt at Samid's father, but the man fell forward instead of backward, crashing on top of the young girl and trapping her under his weight. It took her several minutes to free herself, trying to cast spells at other enemies while struggling. Her leg caught quite firmly underneath Mr. Burkess. A sharp, rusty corner of the man's armor dug into her calf. Ooh. With one tremendous effort, she broke free, ripping a nasty gash in her leg in the process. "Sam!" she cried, but Samid was out cold. Blood poured from his nose, which was obviously broken. Lanny dragged him with a sort of superhuman strength to a protected spot behind a tree and took a moment to rip a piece from her already shredded pant leg and wrap up her own gushing wound. Samid groaned and moved his head weakly. The left side of his face was rapidly swelling up and turning purple. "Stay still," hissed Lanny. Samid opened only the one eye that would open. He coughed, swallowed painfully, and whispered, "Kill him." Lanny gave him a wild, pleading look. "Oh, Sam, I can't." Samid looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded weakly and tried to smile. "It's okay," he told to his side and spit blood, then took a deep breath and rose shakily to his feet. "I'll be right back." "No, Sam," Lanny whispered. Samid staggered over to his father, released the paralyzing spell, and waited for Mr. Burkesh to stand and get his bearings again. The boy stood nearly eye to eye with the man. Father, Mr. Burkesh declared. He pulled a knife from his belt and held it to Samid's neck. Lanny ran towards them. No! She cried. Father, Samid said again, his voice deathly calm. Mr. Burkesh's hand trembled slightly as his face grew red. He spoke in harsh, drawn-out words. Don't speak to me. You are no son of mine. And then he hesitated no longer. Rearing back with the knife and roaring, Die 1,000 deaths! He plunged it through the air towards Samid. Samid shook, but he made no move to stop him. Lanny screamed, No, Samid! She began uttering another paralyzing taunt, just as a thin voice from somewhere above her uttered a sharp, rhyming curse. Immediately, Mr. Burkesh flew backwards in the air and landed on the ground. His hand relaxed on the knife, and it fell in the grass. Samid sank to his hands and knees, shaking his head in disbelief, sobs and blood clutching at his throat. I had to know, he choked out, if he would really do it. Lanny tossed off a quick handful of spells at the other Quilitary nearby, and when they were all temporarily contained, she looked up to see where the voice had come from. In the tree sat Mr. Siegfried Appleblossom. He hopped to the ground nimbly, walked over to Mr. Burkesh, and putting a foot on his chest, tugged at something. Soon he pulled out a small, thin, fencing sword, as clear as an icicle. He ceremoniously wiped it clean on the grass, gave it a quick polish with his hanky, and handed it to the wounded boy and said, Your father is a beast beyond compare. You proved you have more dignity and grace. Your worth to me. It's more than I can share. He paused tearfully, took a steadying breath, and continued. Now go inside. Have someone fix your face. And with that, Mr. Appleblossom returned to his post in the tree. There's a whole lot going on, and I'm stopping that right there at 428. I want you just to draw that. And when you draw that for me, if you want to get a parent, take a picture and email it to me, you can do that, okay? Unless I can find a way that you can draw it online for me,